design can also support the societal transformation and create like a more systemic impact. And since then, I've been looking ways how we can bring that into design business, but it was very difficult because usually there's no client for transition design because it's such a systemic approach. During that time at Hellon, we were able to get one project for Prime Minister's office where we applied some of the methods, but usually all companies have some specific perspectives. Anyways, eventually I had the courage to become start my entrepreneurial journey, and I started to work as a freelance designer, and also with the Systems Change Finland community. I was working many years in the board and learning systems thinking tools. And Falay is a creative systems change think tank, but it actually emerged a little bit naturally. While I've been trying to work in this impact area, a lot of people, especially in Aalto University's creative sustainability department, there's this interesting program in Finland that combines the systems thinking sustainability with art and creativity, and the graduates started to be kind of come around me, and we start to form a community. But I also was quite carefully not interested to build yet another design consultancy. So we built this entrepreneurial network as a new method to see, can we be more intentional what type of projects we want to do and use our entrepreneurial freedom space to experiment with those. So now it's been working like a couple of years that way, and we've been really bringing to life really interesting projects. And there are a lot of artists and researchers as well in our network. So today, and you can go and check out in falaydesign.com the work we are doing. But what I wanted to especially highlight is it's very difficult in the traditional business consultancies to apply these methods that are multifaceted and systemic, because usually when you are focusing on the client needs, of course, the clients have briefs that are supporting the current system dynamics, and working for the future is very difficult, and it requires also new type of funding mechanisms that we are also a bit experimenting with. But today's session is about transition design, so I will a little bit explain and then show you some of the tools and a couple of projects that we are doing. But why transition design? Because we live in a world of uncertainty and profound transformation, and our choices now and in the near term will define the quality of life for future generations. So it's really, I think, more and more we've sensed into this big transformation that we are part of. It's a very critical time to be alive and to have our professional agency to create an impact. So we need new methods and ways of working, basically. And we are still part of an economy that normalizes externalities. So businesses especially are not accountable for the social and environmental negative impact they are creating. They are kind of outsourcing those things to policymakers and public sector. However, for example, the speed of technology is so fast that it's very difficult for the policymakers to come in advance to create precautions to prevent harm. So we need to now step up as the businesses to take accountability to the future impact that they are creating. And we need to have new type of methods to build capacity to understand these unintended consequences and second order effects. And we know that these systemic problems are not happening in silos. So as we call, wicked problems are systemic, interlinked, embedded within each other, and they cannot be addressed in isolation. So, but the problem is that our current society is organized as silos. So we have researchers creating knowledge, and we have businesses creating profit, and then there's like different type of businesses and disciplines that tries to go deeper in understanding one topic at a time. But what are the new transdisciplinary approaches that we need to bring to life that focuses on the interconnectedness and this relationality? And this is where transition design is a little bit trying to apply. And of course, businesses are having a lot of difficulties to step up because of the short-term financial pressures, risk-averse, fear-driven decision-making, pushing the responsibility of other actors, also this extraction and efficiency focus. So we really need to create new type of a bit out of norm institutions, projects, funding mechanisms, actors that starts to I say poke the system from unusual places in order to enable these shifts. And that's what my career also showed me, that it's been very difficult to make change for me in a bigger design consultancy that are kind of, you are forced to answer the needs of the market in order to generate revenue and pay the salaries. But through this more fluid entrepreneurial network, we feel we can choose what we do because we carry our own individual financial and well-being responsibility, and that brings us some sort of new activist entrepreneurship space to do things that we believe we can invest. But none of the public institution actors or private institution actors can go out of their institutional requirements as freely as these independent actors, and that's why I think it's quite interesting to use the free power of entrepreneurship for this field, activist entrepreneurship. And for those of you who come from design field, there is a very interesting framework in the book called Design for Sustainability. And this İdilgazi Ulusoy is one of our close collaborator and also the professor at Aalto University, and they created this multi-level innovation framework which maps different design fields in connection to sustainability impact. For example, of course, there's a lot of work right now done in material and component level. We need to design products, with much more sustainable materials, repairable, all these kind of better kind of consideration of the production methods to become less carbon, low carbon processes. And then we move to the product or product service system level innovation. And there, of course, service design, UX design through servitization, there's a lot of shift from more material economy to service economy, and thus becomes more sustainable, in many different areas, we see that. And then there is this next level, which is the spatio-social level innovation. And there comes a lot of community practices. So we are seeing a lot of community-based new ways of living, like these transition towns and so on, experimenting with some new type of systemic solutions to learn from and to innovate. But then when we go to the socio-technical level systems, basic transition design is targeting that right upper corner in the design field. So we are moving from product to UX to service, and then transitions is on the top level. But the problem is then the scope of design intervention, when we move from left to right, it shifts from more insular scope, like from one material or one product or customer relation, to this much more systemic and complex systems. And then the problems of the design problem becomes also more from technocentric to behavior centric and not human, but maybe society centric. And we don't have enough methods and a track record right now to innovate in that right upper corner. And transition design is trying to open up the pathway to bring the design methodology in that level. So, as I mentioned before, anytime, please raise your hand and we can have a dialogue and if you have a question. But what is transition design? So, first of all, it's a discipline that at heart, it proposes that we can intentionally seed and catalyze transitions in the future towards more sustainable futures. So it's an approach that has a trust and hope in our agency to influence. So not all disciplines have that. Some of them are a bit more skeptical, but here we believe that we have a power over future, and by organizing ourselves today, we can reach more sustainable future. So that's the kind of core. And it's also a transdisciplinary approach. It's built on methods and theories of change from multiple fields. Even though now there's, for example, in Carnegie Mellon, there's transition design PhDs already have been graduating several years. So as a discipline, it's also going deeper, but it's a very young discipline, nevertheless. But it borrows methods from systems innovation, anthropology, futures thinking, systems thinking, design research, transition management, regenerative leadership, sustainability science. So it's kind of trying to be in between. And also the practitioners are from various disciplines. So it's not about, one perspective. And of course, there are a lot of different words also used, like design for transitions is some of them. So I'm kind of thinking transition design is a kind of easy thing to remember for other actors. That's why I'm using it. But I'm not coming from an academic perspective. So if you write in the academia, there's also a lot of challenges about this terminology and so on. And when we talk about transitions, so of course they are highly complex, dynamic, and long-term changes. So they have very large stakeholder base, they challenge power structures and replace institutions, and they're underlined by high uncertainty. And they are like social, economical, technological governance challenges that are influenced all from each other. And there's one case study about shifting from horse carriages to the cars in about 60 years. And in that case study, of course, it explains that even though this transition has been kind of triggered from a technological invention, the way it transformed the whole society and urban living required, of course, a lot of emergence of new institutions, or defining what it means to be in the streets, humans and cars together. It required to design traffic rules and traffic signs and, change the whole urban kind of structures and design. It required like traffic licenses and how to actually create systems that kind of give these licenses and check the cars, etc. So it has not been just a technological evolution. So when we look right now, for example, last 20 years and how mobile internet changed our way of life, we could see, of course, because I was in those teams at Nokia when the first N series came, and we could see definitely this connectivity, accessing information anytime, anywhere, everybody connects to each other. But then we didn't see that we are going to raise our own children with addiction problems. I mean, nobody, and they were like super smart people. There were a lot of resources, there were a lot of investment, but businesses didn't kind of created their questions this way. What is the harm this kind of things can create in the future? And now sometimes when we are organizing these transition workshops, I like to ask that, okay, let's go back to the last 20 years and understand what are all the different things that affected each other, and then play what could have happened in the past to prevent the harm of today. And these things doesn't happen only from the businesses, but from the public sector and from the policymakers, from different actors. What else could have happened to prevent the harm of today? And this is a new type of thinking we need to nurture and develop as a capacity, because this is more important than ever when we are looking to the future of AI. You know, we are right now in the speed of like development and competition and which country will win, but we don't. And then there's some ethical AI discussions, but then there are not this systemic way of looking that, okay, what else needs to happen at the moment to reduce the harm to the future? And these are like very important to kind of almost, it's a like transformation literacy and this time literacy that we didn't have as a humanity in the past, and we need to develop now. This is a framework that we refer a lot. It comes from transition management side, from Berkane Institute's double loop diagram. And here it shows this two, like a bit simplified version of two systems. So there's a dominant system that starts to kind of destabilize by, and then right now in the society and in the world situation we live in, we feel the symptoms of that destabilization of our current system. Things are, you know, just from mental health problems to the young generations detachment from the society. There's a lot of systems, the constant kind of changing the economical gaps, etc. And then, but then we don't want systems to collapse. So there are stabilizers. So there are a lot of companies, they need to keep going in order kind of, we don't want chaos. But then there can be some pioneers start to work in this emergence of a new system that is different than today's dynamics and norms and rules. And then when those pioneers become this networks and community of practice with the investment and support, they can start to pull the dominant system to the new one. And in the same time, we can have these actors of the current system that focus on decomposition and hospice work, which means how do we let go the part of our current system that doesn't serve anymore. Let's say fossil oil industry needs to be coming down, and then there's of course a lot of actors that benefits from this as this system that prevents and delays that change. But then there can be, as long as this emergent system and its benefits starts visible, then that defense starts to kind of weaken, and then this decomposition happens faster. So this is basically trying to create some framework to name the things that are kind of happening anyways, but also we can be more intentional in these strategies of deliberate transformation. Because otherwise we just wait and things keeps happening, and what happens is not necessarily desirable, and we just end up in these futures that are harmful, and a lot of people get hurt by that. And also one maybe important thing to say is that this incremental improvements of the sustainability field is happening a lot with the other design fields, and they are very, very important, of course, incrementally reducing the harm of the current system. But with this transition design, we are a bit more focusing on the radical transformation. So real system change and real imagination of some totally different ways of organizing the society and different systems. And I can give you like, I'm mostly influenced by this Carnegie Mellon University and Aalto University professors. And we are focusing in our team to bring those theoretical framework into practice. But then more and more actually programs started to open up in UK. I think, yeah, it's much different than 5 years ago right now. And I'm going to go a bit fast so that we have still time. But the way we are applying in Falay Transition Design, that we think this is like there are 3 key elements in our process. One is about the systems knowledge, understanding the wicked problem in present, and we borrow a lot of tools from systems thinking to map the current systems. Also to map the past transitions, how did we end up here? What are all the technological, environmental, economical, social events that influenced each other, and kind of we ended up in this situation. And this, we are doing this to develop the capacity to understand transformations. Then the second part is about the developing futures knowledge. And that's very, very important for the creative practitioners to come on board, because this is a lot about envisioning desirable, radically different futures. And this is not done with the past data. It's not about, past research, but it's about tuning in to our ability to intuitively feel what is desirable, what is calling from the future, and what do we want to do in our hearts, and start imagining different things. And artistic practice has that in its core, and we need to bring that closer to the industrial, also decision making. So we've been developing a lot of tools how to bring this futures knowledge to the companies and contribute. I will actually show you one interesting case before we end that just finished in Finland that I think you will enjoy. And the third part of this knowledge is transition knowledge. And here we are talking a lot about designing interventions and pathways and learning from these interventions. So a bit shifting the mind from finding the solution to fix the problem to continuous learning and developing better sense about the future and how to steer towards more desirable futures. And this is a kind of, again, typically the current investments of the companies or organizations goes to finding a clear solution to something and solving a problem, and this kind of learning outcomes are a bit less encouraged outside research. So that's also we are a bit advocating. Okay, now I will maybe jump these things, but maybe I will kind of quickly go, like there's like 4 principles that I usually talk. So this is a very political thing, because it's a participatory process of co-creation and deliberation of the qualities of the future. So who can get involved in future decision making is one of the questions, and we are trying to bring multi-stakeholders, more than human stakeholders, position of, like, not only the position of power, but like looking from this bigger lens, and involving those actors into this processes as well. So that's one of the big things. The second one is about the mental model. So we don't want to apply these things only to the surface level events, but actually going, what are the underlying structures that are holding the current solutions, and what are the mental models, assumptions, beliefs, values people have that holds these structures in place. Because when we can map these things, then we can imagine, okay, what if the mental models shift? Then what kind of new structures and patterns and events can be developed from there? So that's this is the kind of paradigm, questioning the paradigm. And also, I don't know, probably you are familiar with this leverage points framework of Donella Meadows. So again, in transition design, we are trying to go to this deep leverage points, to this more on the right side, really kind of questioning the goal of the system mindset and trying to find intervention that's trying to intervene in that deep leverage points. I'm not going into this, but if you are not familiar, check this out for sure. And then imagination is a big part of it. So we do a lot of like kind of creative exercise about imagination and prototyping of the futures. And then this aligning future possibilities and the present short-term realities. And through this transition pathways, we try to create this, as I mentioned, the learning paths and possibilities. Okay, I'm going faster now. But in a summary, so transition design invites us to step back and ask what kind of future we're actually aiming for, what values, behaviors, and systems do we want to cultivate, and how do we backcast from there to guide the decisions we make today. So if you're a technology company, don't jump into the next strategy about, okay, of course, you will do, of course, what the customer wants, etc. But then also what type of future values, mindset, our technological infrastructure is kind of steering towards is a more and more important question that companies have to ask, because their impact is not anymore kind of small. It affects all of us and future generations. And I'm going to jump these. Oh yeah, this was the thing we did actually. We just finished in Finland a project for the Prime Minister's office and the panel of sustainable development. So it was a journey to 2050. So we created this transition story in 2050 based on the government kind of policy brief. And now we created this in the public library in Oddi last 2 days, a future simulation where citizens could come in and feel how that future could look and feel like. And this was a very, very important example to make this future policy tangible for today's actors. So instead of like staying in this incremental and tangible level of business and very high level of the policy, now with this transition design and making this long-term and systemic thinking more tangible, we are opening totally new possibilities for discussion, elaboration, participatory decision making. So it's really, I think, interesting case study. We just finished it, and I will, if you share Falay Transition Design's website, newsletter, or you will hear more about this project. And usually we do like either transition design sprints or larger projects depending on the budget and focus, etc. But always we have kind of some chapter that goes deeper in the systems understanding and mapping. And then we used a lot of canvases we have been designing to make this kind of conversations easier. And then in the second, we've been designing some futures game that helps people to write these fictional stories of the future with different perspectives. And then we have some methods around this transition pathway development that helps, basically combines backcasting, forecasting, and tries to identify these interventions rather than, creating a final solution to things. And there's been like many different cases that we applied digital or physical, but I think more and more it's not about just workshop. Like this type of workshopping helps holding space for a group of actors to look at these topics from a systemic point of view. But I think this futures prototyping took it to the next level for engaging and inviting citizens, for example, to have a very kind of tangible experience about one of the possibilities of the future and then give their reactions to it and influence policy through that interaction. Maybe I shut up now because I have many other things, but I love to hear about you guys as well. And if there's any questions.
Thanks, Zeynep. Thanks for the overview. We have about 3 questions. The first question is from Kim. Would you like to ask it yourself, Kim, or would you want me to read it?
No, sure, I can ask it. Thank you very much, Zeynep, for this interesting presentation. Really like the graphics, so nice. Yeah, so my question is around this transition journey, because you mentioned it's often about radical ideas. We got to try something new, right? And this to be expected, it should be some resistance. There's going to be friction in those kind of journeys. So I wonder, do you have any knowledge or ideas around the strategies or protocols for the coordination because that's where I feel a lot of these things, at least from my perspective, falls apart. It's not good coordination between actors. They have some good ideas, some intentions, some intervention strategies, but they're not managing to coordinate correctly or in a good way. So I was just wondering if you had some thoughts on that. Thanks.
Of course, now I don't know from what type of field and perspective you're asking for, but I will give a general answer and another example I didn't show now. But basically, the change is very personal process as well. While we are trying to do things in a professional context, it connects actually to our professional identity and questioning our own kind of power in things and how we are forming. So what we are trying to embed also in the process, and this was a project, for example, for Finnish NGO called Fingo that works in international development sector, and we had this transition design process about decolonization of aid, like how we can decolonize the international development sector, which is basically, by its core, this global north is giving money to develop global south type of context. And from the beginning, we know that this process will trigger a lot of emotions, a lot of potential defenses for people who kind of like live through their life thinking they are doing really good. And now from this decolonization lens, they may feel attacked, they may feel shame, they may feel confusion. And we somehow introduce some methods into the process to hold these emotions actually. And this was very interesting. We had participants from East and West Africa, as well as a lot of Finnish sector NGO participants. And we had, for example, something called emotional carpet weaving. Like from the very beginning, we kind of open up this that the fact that this can trigger emotions and it is okay somehow, because the systemic injustice that we are part of in the world is not a personal burden to carry, but it's a collective burden to carry. And we need to have tools to help each other to manage our personal emotions while trying to work with the systems that we are compliant in, we are part of. So in every organizational change, there will be some key actors that will be kind of threatened by this, progressive ideas, these changes, but they need to be also held with compassion and they need to be supported. So this is something that we keep integrating into the transition design process, this more inner development side, and how we actually integrate a little bit this compassion and kind of acceptance that these are big topics, many of them are big, also sad topics, but I mean we're also the continuation of the history, so it's we didn't choose where we were born, so but learning from the past and then looking to the future with that new information is what matters. So I think that part is a little bit missing right now in the business as usual when they are trying to apply these new methods with the principles and or way of being of the old paradigm. It gets stuck somewhere on the way, and it's very hard to make the real radical change unless we address the inner development side and this collective healing or grieving and letting go, like all of them are part of this process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. I love it. Compassion as a strategy. Great, thanks.
Any other comment?
We do have two questions, one from Miguel and one from Nelson. Nelson, would you like to go first?
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
I was typing and I was just going on for long. Hi guys, my name is Tozamile Fuchani. I'm from South Africa. I'm actually excited about all of this, but I'll try to minimize my questions, and as we get to know each other, we'll get into it. I've got a finance background, but from accounting, So now I've been doing a lot of research in terms of this digital economy, ecosystems, and all that stuff, you know. So now, from a strategy point of view, the progression of an entity, I realized, I think it was learning, growing, then I think sustain, then transform, right? But then now, later, I think a month later, I discovered this transitional model and the regenerative model, which was great. But now, at the same time, I felt that they opposed the transformational model and the regenerative model. That's one. And then number two, does not feature because you only sustain something that's already working. That's sustainable. And after you sustain it, then you can transform it, right? So I'm talking particular to the marginalized communities, you know. So the informal economies, they've got nothing to sustain in terms of formal corporate structures. So how is it that we take that stuff and fit it into this type of model? Because it doesn't, it's very difficult to put it in here. I don't know if I'm making sense, man.
I'm not sure I was able to follow you. I'm sorry. Did anybody else get
Okay.
it, or can you help me? Yeah, or ask again.
Okay, let me try to clarify then. I live in the township, right? Where it's the informal economy, where people were marginalized, financial system is not catering for them. So they've developed their own way of functioning, right? And as much as it's informal, it works for them, but it does not feature into the normal standard operating procedures of how you guys are structured, which is not a problem because that's what you're exposed to, you know? So what I'm trying to say is that how is it, because we want to build a solution around these, around how they operate, because other than that, because there's a cultural shock where people don't even have access to computers and they don't even think they can do anything. So we need to build no matter how great an app is, they got to talk to WhatsApp. But behind that, but now what I'm trying to say is that how do you incorporate, because the corporate structure says it's formal as though it was high and mighty, and the informal economy does not exist. So it does not meet your normal standard operating practices. So how do you incorporate it in how do you build a solution like that where you bring these guys in to seamlessly integrate into this? Because logically it makes sense, because at the end of the day it's business, like buyer, supplier, we're trying to do the same thing, but how they do it is different, you know. So I just want you to understand, how does one do that?
I don't think this is an easy answer for this, but when it comes, I mean, from this design processes point of view, I think service design methods have a lot of kind of perspectives to understanding the user needs, context, and how to kind of most suitably, accessibly kind of design services for different stakeholder groups. But transition is another thing that looks actually not only one solution or one kind of service, but everything else around those communities that is about their well-being, their prosperity, and so on, and what type of economical model make actually help them in the long term. And that's a different type of approach. And again, not always coming up to the same level of the so-called progress system might be the right way. For example, right now we see a lot of kind of lost value from indigenous communities that is not part of modern society. So how can we be smarter that instead of like just following up the latest trends to actually give also understanding of these different, you know, different communities' strengths that might be even better than the dominant system and somehow learn from them to do things in a different way. So it's not an easy answer to you, but hopefully this helped a little bit.
No, but I think you answered it very well. And then just the last one, because I think, like I said, it's overwhelming, all this stuff, and it's not my field.
I think it's best to move on.
Do they follow a particular chronological order?
People, I think, so we can have other questions. There's another one, wasn't there, Azra?
Yeah, there's one in the chat, the two in the chat, and then maybe we can come to you, Chris, after that. We have one from Mikhail. Would you like to ask this question?
Yes, I can ask it. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. First of all, thank you for a nice presentation. It was very interesting. I was just wondering, you were presenting this process of co-creating knowledge, system knowledge, visions, and then afterwards interventions. And I've been reading a bit into transition theories, and one of the key tenets is that it's often long-term. It can take decades. And I just wondered, I wanted to ask you, how do you work then afterwards when the interventions have been made and you have to operationalize it into, for example, I think one of the terms you mentioned, or Gashulusa mentioned, is transition projects.
Yes, I was referring to this transition towns that you can check. Actually, it's really interesting intervention, but I think my focus has been mostly developing this awareness at the moment, rather than being part of a long transition of one kind of area. So I have a bit more generalist background. But what I'm seeing is we need to build out of the norm examples, and we need to find investment and budgets for those things to come to life. For example, I feel our Falay Collective is one of them, because we were a bit organized against the business as usual thinking and traditional design consultancy thinking. And we deliberately stay, for example, in between research, business and arts. We don't belong any of them, but we borrow methods from all of them. And we challenge funders to actually fund this kind of in-betweenness. And that's one of our interventions that is not an easy place to be, but we feel in the future we need this type of new institutions and funding mechanisms that supports this level. Another example I'm part of is this in Helsinki. There's a place called Puistakatu 4. It's one of these kind of big industrial companies actually invested for their foundation, this place called House of Science and Hope. So they are inviting very different researchers and agents, they call it, non-academic actors, and everybody works around ecological sustainability, but they invite them into the same house to be. So it's a bit like co-working space, but there's also a new type of projects emerging with people coming from very different disciplines, from law to design to business to science. And somehow nobody is kind of connected through institutional structures, but you live in the same place, and then new type of information emerges. So this is a new type of trial compared to these more silo organizations that have same agenda and so on. So we need to see new type of organizations and ways of working or ways of communities that work with a bit different rules and values being experimented, and now we can learn from them, and then some of them can start to shift and become dominant. There are, for example, elderly communities, friends coming together to kind of replace this traditional elderly home service through a community supported way. And these are very interesting glimpses of what the future system could be. But now we need these pioneering examples, and that's the interventions about. And they need extra funding, because typically when you make something different and new and force it to compete with the other dominant institutions, it may be very fragile. So we need to also have protection mechanisms as well as learning mechanisms from these new glimpses and interventions.
Thanks, Zainab. Thanks for clearing that for Mikhail. Nelson, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, thanks. Zeynep, thank you for the valuable ideas you're sharing with us. The question I have is, which ideas could be useful to mitigate or reduce the potential negative impacts when we are at phase 3 interventions, and perhaps you start to see they are proving inadequate in this stage, and also how to manage the sensations, perhaps, that we are not going into the right direction. But as in biological processes, for example, some things don't have the indicators that the process is going into the transformation we want, but it's part of the process going through that phase.
Okay, again, I'm not sure if I'm fully understanding your background, but I'm going to give an answer. Let's see if that resonates at all. So the transformation will never be where we want it to go. I think we need to start letting go that fantasy we can control everything. But what we can do is much more learn how to live in this and work and think, organize with this principles of a living system and kind of adapting to what's emerging and kind of being the nurturer of those things. So as long as we apply these methods with this old mechanistic industrial worldview, where we think we are not part of the process we are influencing and we can control it, we will be failing. So that's what is the kind of transformative part and why this inner work is kind of very relevant. We need to shift not only our processes, but also how we see ourselves. Like one of our projects we do at Falay is, for example, okay, what if this kind of nature relationality shifts from this extractive relationality to reciprocal relationality? So how could we imagine the industrial systems when the future rights of nature will come in life, and how can we shift the whole worldview with that type of fundamental shifts? And yeah, I think we are right now having a huge technological development, but applying it with this very kind of industrial era principles, which is creating more harm eventually than progress. Like incrementally we are improving things, but we need new type of leadership that understand this more big picture and this more shifting our kind of the way we are and how we are actually seeing ourselves as in this profession. I'm a bit sounding vague here, but I think we won't solve it with formulas.
Thanks, Zeynep. I think we can take 2 more questions. So Chris, it's your turn.
It's difficult to distill one question. I'm really enjoying this. Thank you. I think because we have you present and you're experiencing this in real time, it sounds to me like you're designing an organization that is also an open question of what is this organization and how might we best suit it and how might we best operate, so that it doesn't have maybe a traditional structure of a design agency or, I don't know, these other ways of consulting. And it sounds like you're very much in the midst of asking these questions of how to do this process for other people and also what you are. I'm curious to know, like, what are the maybe one leading question that you're currently asking, or what's something that you feel is emerging in you and with your team in the moment? You're gonna say, oh, this is just coming to the surface and maybe is exciting for you.
Thank you for this question, and I feel like you really sense where I am, because it is, you're absolutely right. I'm an experiment myself, and the organization is an experiment, and our project's in an experiment. So we are experimenting in multi-level, and that's the only way. Otherwise, something will always kind of fall backwards. And I think what I'm kind of holding right now is the collective consists of a lot of young people who don't have necessarily the experience and brainwash of the old paradigm. So, and that's I find very, very valuable. I think we need to lean on the young people's intuition of what they want to see and kind of use that resource in a smarter way. Otherwise, when they come to traditional organizations and gain professional experience, then they start to adapt and submit old ways of doing things. And we are constantly wasting brilliant minds by pulling them back to the old system. So how can we establish this new emergence of this new, like, how do we protect the new minds not to be learning the old ways? And basically, I have a lot of experience, so I see my role in this community almost as a kind of protector and custodian. And then I'm like very carefully trying to listen and observe and sense into what makes like them excited, and also convince the funders and, you know, different people in power why they need to invest and invite this type of thinking. And we had actually, it's been very difficult, but I think we started to get some attraction and somehow acceptance, and especially with this Prime Minister Office, Futures Prototyping opened their minds, totally new possibilities now. So I think kind of if you're there, hold on and be confident, because the world needs this new thinking. But of course, hand in hand with the experience and old kind of learnings are not all bad, but we can't just keep doing what the kind of past leaders have learned, because they are not able to solve this right now. So
I think that resonates with Chris, so thank you, Zeynep, for that. We are unfortunately towards the end of this session, but we do have one question in the chat which has got like few upvotes. Maybe I will just read it out. In complex adaptive systems, there is a logic of interconnectedness between open systems. How do you define when to stop understanding a system's variables, and how do you set the limit?
I think it's a lot about, again, developing the senses and intuition and listening and revisiting decisions. So it's not one decision and we execute now this and we achieve our results, but actually this constantly sensing and responding capacity is the way. You will make a decision and then you will be open that it's not right. And then by that learning, we will create something else immediately. Like, yeah, some elements of the agile, but not for that purpose what agile has been applied, but for the systemic change and this kind of humble way of being the future custodians and, you know, trusting that new type of wisdom in us. I think there's no like formula to these questions, and I find it's, I don't know how to answer really. But we are asking. But thank you so much for all the great questions, and please connect to me, follow Falay. We want to be in contact, and I think this networks. And thank you for System Innovation Network. I think these communities are also very key for the future transition. So we are this mycelium network that we need to kind of nourish each other and give this information back and forth and somehow get stronger together.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Zeynep, for this powerful insights that you have in helping us understand how design can help us drive change in systems and looking at it in a holistic way. And thank you also for joining to be part of the Design Hub event today. I thank everyone for joining our event today, and let's just carry this inspiration and power forward. And you can connect with Zeynep online. You can also join and follow our Design Hub. And then in case if you would also want to join our events, you can always check out in the event space on the Design Hub there. I recorded this session. I'm sorry, I did a bit later than usual, so I will upload it on the YouTube tomorrow. You can also look at it at your leisure. And thanks everyone for joining today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Just one thing, sorry.